She was chosen by women of Ngiroriti to bridge two worlds, one rooted in centuries of pastoral practice and the other in global carbon markets and international climate finance. For 3 years, Mary Lempoe has carried messages between them, translating technical documents, relaying project development, and asking her leadership to explain decisions that affect her village land and future. Her questions have revealed something promising and troubling. A gap between what the Carbon Project claims it is doing and what communities says they understand about it.
Representative communities.
This dispensary, the first health facility in Ngiroriti, a remote region that has received limited government investment since Kenya's independence, is both the promise and the paradox of the Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project.
So sisi tulikuwa tunaona kama yes kuna carbon na imetusaidia, lakini haikuwa na uwazi. Ingekuwa na uwazi tujue imeuzwa aje ama nini, tungekuwa na steps zenye tutachukua watu wafaidike na hii, wanafunzi na hii, wakina mama na hii, na hata watu wazee. So that is the challenge.
2 million shillings built this dispensary. It is tangible evidence that money from carbon credits has reached the ground. Children will be vaccinated here. Mothers will receive prenatal care. Injuries will be treated. These are real benefits for a village that waited decades for basic health care. Yet Mary's frustration captures something more complex than simple success or failure. It speaks to a question that now haunts carbon projects across Africa. When communities provide the land that powers global climate solutions, do they truly understand what they have agreed to? How much their contribution is worth, or whether they are receiving their fair share? The Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project is the world's largest soil carbon removal initiative. It spans 1.9 million hectares across Samburu, Laikipia, Marsabit, and Isiolo counties, land managed by 14 community conservancies representing over 10% of Kenya's total land mass. The project's ecological problem is measurable and severe. According to project documentation, approximately 70% of rangelands in the region are highly degraded, with over 50% heavily eroded. Soil carbon stocks, a key indicator of soil health, are critically low across 40% of the landscape. Climate change, prolonged drought, and unsustainable grazing have degraded the land over decades. The Northern Rangeland Trust, which oversees the project, argues that carbon financing offers a solution by providing income for communities that adopt rotational grazing practices, moving livestock systematically rather than allowing to overgraze in one area. The project aims to both restore grasslands and generate climate finance. The numbers are significant. The project claims it will remove 50 million tons of CO2 over 30 years, roughly equivalent to the annual emissions from 10 million cars. The project has generated hundreds of millions of dollars in anticipated revenue for local communities, according to NRT's projection. The project was developed in 2008 with an official start date of December 2012. NRT says that throughout the process, it conducted a high level of stakeholders' engagement across the project area, including official awareness workshops, public events, and formal letters of intent and consent forms that conservancies sought approval from their communities to sign. But even as the project gained international recognition, tensions began building within the communities it serves. What emerged was not a dispute over whether development benefits were arriving, but a disagreement about whether communities truly understood what they had agreed to.
Umuhimu yake baadaye ingekuwa mzuri tuelezwe vizuri. Mimi nikielezwa nasikia kidogo, najua nitaeleza mwenzangu ule kabisa haelewi. Hii kitu inauzwa aje? Na yani process yenye inatumiwa, hata kama utaambiwa ni peni ngapi imeuzwa, lakini imetumiwa hadi kufikia ikiwa na maana.
Hii ya 2023 tulipata hii dispensary na pia tulipata watoto walipata bursaries. So ile challenge siko mambo na carbon watu waelewe, sisi hatuelewi kwa sababu mambo na soko hatujui inauzwa aje. Sisi tunapata tu pesa, hatujui pesa inauzwa vile inauzwa. Naambiwa tu pesa carbon inauzwa na hatujui inauzwa na pesa ngapi.
Community members cite a specific grievance. They only received access to the project contracts nearly a decade after implementation began. The 2 million shillings dispensary cost was allocated from 42 million shillings given to 3 community lands, Nkiroriti, Musul and Kijabe. The rest was distributed to education, water and grazing projects, all valuable. Yet decisions about allocation, community members say, lacked sufficient transparency about the underlying mechanics and value of carbon being sold.
There was no FP because the community has got very little information about this carbon. So up to date, we are still struggling to understand what is this carbon. And to me, this carbon sometimes I call it is a scam or an organized crime. Why I call it? Because we have very little information about it. And whenever we ask for this information, we don't get the right information. The information are being put in channels that it is not easily accessible.
Frank Setek raises a concern about FPIC, the Free Prior Informed Consent, a principle now mandated by the Kenya's 2024 carbon markets regulations. FPIC requires that project proponents provide communities with complete information and secure documented consent before proceeding. In a response to our queries, NRT says that a detailed and extensive FPIC process was followed, conducted in local languages, and the project has massive and widespread community support. NRT notes that it conducted special annual general meetings at village level in each participating conservancy to ensure awareness and understanding, and that all 14 conservancies signed an implementation agreement on 24th June 2021, signifying their continued commitment to the project. However, community members counter that signed agreements do not necessarily indicate full comprehension consent.
Unajua kujenderuka sometimes unaanza kuongea unaambiwa tunaenda pa kilomita. So unaona kwa hii kitu hakuna uwazi. Ungekuwa umeambiwa kutoka beginning hii front inauzwa ama hivyo ndio tunafuatilia, ingekuwa naridhika pia mimi. Lakini sasa sijaridhika juu sielewi, sijaelezwa vizuri venye naka.
Mary was asked to translate a complex global market into terms her village could understand and act upon, but the architecture of community decision-making made her job nearly impossible.
Mjengo kama tank ndio inaenda kujengwa kama hospitali, tumesema dispensary inajengwa. Hakuna siku mama anaingilia kazi ya kuchimba shimo. Unaona? So kama mlikuwa tumepewa 4,000,000 ndio imejengwa hapo, ni wanaume 4 5 ndio watakuwa wamefaidika, sisi wakina mama hakuna pale tunapata. Tumepata ya school fees, lakini sio kila mama ndio akona mtoto ya school fees. Ule mama hana mtoto wa school fees hajapata. Ule mzee hajapata. Na hawajawahi kuchukua hata kusema juu, na hata sio kuchukua, yaitoshi yenye tunapewa.
Mary's complaint shows a structural exclusion. Women comprise roughly 50% of pastoralist communities, but hold only a fraction of decision-making positions in conservancies and committees. Projects designed to generate community income often allocate benefits to roles dominated by men, grazing committee positions, conservancy leadership, leaving women's labor and needs undervalued in development planning.
Even as we don't know how much as carbon is being produced, like the carbon sequestration of our land, are they basing on land mass? Are they basing on the amount of carbon we are emitting or we are absorbing? So that is still remaining, but we still hope that it will reach a time that the communities will be in that discussion table. Our goal is to have empowered communities that will not be victims, but solutions, because we are the solution of climate change. If it is climate change that is becoming an issue, we are the one who have been conserving that environment. The communities have been living there, doing their traditional way of conserving their land. So at the end, we want a community that is empowered to have a say at the discussion table.
The methodology for calculating carbon credits remain unclear to many community members. The project uses the VM0032 methodology and modeled removals rather than measured removals, making it a better test of that methodology, the first of its kind. This complicity creates an inherent information gap. Beneath surface tensions over transparency, a more serious crisis has emerged. A satellite area included in carbon offset calculations overlapped with privately owned ranches near Naibunga Central Community Conservancy. These ranches were counted as part of the community's offset area without formal agreements in place. Private ranch owners are now demanding 14 million shillings in compensation for unauthorized use of their land in carbon calculations. The Conservancy now faces impossible choice: pay money it doesn't have or face legal action.
So private lands raised a question: why are we not being part of these beneficiaries? Yet we are in the project area map. So from the word go, nobody was involved.
Afadhali kitu yenye mtu anakuja kuliko settlers, kutuma settlers na kuna atuelewi. How do you know the land of the other people kama unatumia settlers? Si afadhali kuwe na ule mtu anaelewa boundary ni hapa na hapa, afuate. Sasa sisi tuko na hiyo challenge kabisa, hata atuelewi tunaelekea wapi, ama nikuza ng'ombe kwa watu wenzetu basi tunye tuna border wametuingisha kwa shida.
The project credibility has faced formal scrutiny. In January 2025, the Environment and Land Court suspended operations in 2 community conservancies in Isiolo County, citing illegal establishment and lack of public participation.
For the community land that was enacted.
In May, Vera, the international carbon certifier, placed the project under review for a second time. This followed an earlier 2023 suspension after advocacy group challenged the project methodology, though the suspension was later lifted.
As I said, my Lord,
when asked about these reviews and concerns, NRT stated that the project was validated under Vera certified carbon standard and 2 independent external auditors, and that it is confident in the data and documentation behind the project. It also disputes claims that satellite imagery directly determines carbon credits, arguing that the data is used only to identify grazed areas and not the quantification model. The first crediting period, 2013 to 2016, generated over 3 million verified carbon credits. They were sold by January 2022, many in large anonymous blocks to Netflix and Meta platforms. The exact total value remains unknown to community members. This lack of transparency has fueled debate about whether communities are receiving their fair share.
As the current project proponent and in line with the 2021 Project Implementation Agreement, NRT retains only fixed administrative costs agreed with communities.
All net revenues were distributed to the 14 participating communities over 3 years, 2022 to 2024. 5% to county governments for rangeland project or drought relief, 40% to conservancy operations, and 60% to community funds for development priorities, which include bursaries, water and drought response. According to NRT, annual revenue was divided into 15 equal portions, with one reserved for low credit periods. However, community members contest this accounting.
When I looked in that agreement, I went straight to the benefit sharing. I realized that the community is just receiving 20% of the total sale of the carbon, of which even the information about the sales, who is buying, at what price, it is very difficult to understand. It has a lot of confidentiality parts of the project. When I rushed to the clause of the duration, I was surprised. 30 years. You can imagine 30 years contract. How 30 years is a long. That is like a baby that is going to be born today will have a baby of his own.
Pesa zile ambazo tunapata hatujui haswa zinakuja sikuwa percentage ngapi ndio tufikie sisi. Hiyo ndio challenge ambayo tuko nayo. Sababu mwenye ambaye ametangulia kujua soko anajua akiwa peke yake.
The discrepancy between the stated distribution model and community members' calculation suggests either a fundamental misunderstanding of the agreement term or a significant information gap about how the revenue model operates. Neither party has resolved this publicly.
We are now developing some plans. One of them is the County Environmental Action Plan. We also have a report called Flourish Report. And we are also having a draft of climate change, County Climate Change Act, which we are now reviewing. That can also guide on how the money will be used according to the law and without interfering with the nature. And again, looking at the climate change threats that are there in the ecosystem.
County governments acknowledge they have limited direct control over agreements struck between investors and communities, but county officials say systematic reform is underway. In September, the Carbon Project representatives met with Community Land Management Committee from all 14 conservancies. The meeting was convened specifically in response to mounting transparency concerns. The regulatory landscape shifted fundamentally in May 2024 when the new climate change regulations came into force. These regulations mandate free prior informed consent with documented evidence, minimum 40% of earnings allocated to communities, detailed community development agreements specifying revenue division, and community participating in decisions, county government oversight through community development agreement committees. The Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project is transitioning from its centralized Carbon Project Oversight Committee to the new CDAC structure required by these regulations.
Now, in the near 5 years to come, I think we will be ourselves will be the proponent ambayo tutakuwa tukiuza mradi yetu na tutakuwa tunajua inauzwa wapi, inauziwa nani, tunauza kiasi gani na tunauza kwa value gani. Na pesa zote zitakuwa zikiingia kwa community na itasaidia community zetu.
The government have developed a framework, a legal framework, whereby the regulations that govern the money for carbon credits through NEMA. And I think county government of Laikipia, our department is also part of that. That committee called now CPOC. They are now making something called CDAC in place of CPOC. So county government representatives will be there in our department, so they can also guide and also give a guidance on how the money will be used in the best way possible restore our lands back. Because if we leave the community to use money alone without anybody supervising them, they can misuse the funds without because they don't have clear ways of clear transparent way that they can hold the money that they have.
Mary Limpoe remains her village window into a world of carbon markets, global climate finance and international regulations. She sits in meetings, she translates documents, she carries the burden of advocacy for people whose labor, their herding practices, their land stewardship, their climate resilience has been monetized without clear understanding of the terms.
Walimu wenye wanafunza wenye wanakuja kutueleza venye inakaa, wanasema tu wanyama wengi wakiwa ndio tunaweza chukua, na hakuna siku tumeyaona wakikuja kufuatilia wanasema tu satellites. So maneno ya satellites, unaambiwa ati ukiwa na miti mingi ndio yenu ndio itakuwa mapato kubwa. Sisi tuko na miti mingi, wanyama wengi, lakini unaona wale wa drylands wengi ndio wanapata. Unaona, kwa sababu hizo fananisha hapa na nini community land zingine. Na sasa hapa kwangu kuna miti mingi kuliko Kijepe. Hapa kwangu kuna miti mingi kuliko Samburu, parts of the Samburu yenye wanakula pia hii pesa. Lakini unaona mimi ndio niko kidogo.
The dispensary stands as a concrete achievement. Schools and water projects represent real community benefit that cannot be disputed or dismissed. Yet Mary's unfinished sentence captured an unresolved tension at the center of this story. What happens when global climate solutions are layered onto local landscapes without foundational conversations about how the mechanism works? Who decides and what constitutes fair exchange? Mary's questions. Who decides how this works? How much is my land actually worth? Where does the money come from and go remain unanswered. NRT argues the project incentivizes collective grazing management amongst conservancy communities, and that without this project, investment in training and awareness on soil health, rotational grazing management and facilitation of grazing committees, grazing patterns would be largely uncoordinated, leading to increased overgrazing, erosion and rangeland degradation. But for local communities, the real challenge isn't what the law says on paper. It is whether the system can truly change. Instead of outsiders making all decisions, it needs to consider and listen to pastoral communities that have been sidelined for years. Margaret Kimathi, NTV.